here's the thing. I don't believe that Trump's going to lose the primary at this point. If things go as they are, he's probably going to win the primary and will be the candidate for the Republican Party in the general election. That's the key area of contest right there. January 6th, the third anniversary. Here we are on the third anniversary of what happened in Washington and the riots. It's been horrendous, this anniversary, to remind us what happened on that day 3 years ago, on the 2021, 6th of January. It was the first time that there was an insurgency where a sitting president actually sought to block the peaceful transfer of power. And Tim, that is extremely dangerous because it never happened before in our history. As President Biden was in Valley Forge today to speak, he noted that President Washington, George Washington, was the first president, set the precedent for a peaceful transition of power by not running for a third term. And that was a precedent set that has lasted pretty much through, except with the exception of President Roosevelt when the amendment was passed to keep it a two-term limit. But the point is, a democracy is defined by the willingness of the opposition to turn over power, at least for the next several years, while they bring forth their case to the public to try to get reelected again. But the newly elected government should be able to take power, as President Biden finally did. But President Trump has been throwing all of this doubt and the big lie that's put out there that the 2020 election was stolen. Very dangerous for democracy. And January 6th was an example of what could happen if someone like a president would incite or support or instigate that kind of action against the peaceful transfer of power, constitutional basis of power. I was reading a piece this morning, and Chris Christie, who of course was a former Donald Trump supporter, ran this time, obviously very loud, but not significant in the sense of whether or not he would have become one of the favourites to become the Republican leader. But he said that Donald Trump will burn the country to the ground. They're pretty dangerous words. We've got to take that pretty serious. That warning has to be taken seriously, Tim. Donald Trump has used words that have never been used before by any other candidate serious candidate for presidency. He has used words that Adolf Hitler had coined those phrases himself. Hitler talked about vermin in terms of his opposition, dehumanizing the opposition, dehumanizing large swaths of the German people who were there, who were not one ethnicity. This is what Trump has been doing. He's been focusing on this type of white supremacy, white nationalism approach to getting his support base rallied, and using words like vermin, using words like immigrants or migrants poisoning our blood. That's straight out of the Hitler book. And this is why Chris Christie is so alarmed, as many of us are, that what would happen if Donald Trump actually wins this election. And there's a good chance that he could win it, unless there's a lot of action taken on part people who want to preserve democracy, who will rally and say this is the most important issue, the preservation of our constitutional democracy. Everything else comes second, Tim, because if we don't have a democracy in a democratic republic, we are going to not be able to even discuss or debate issues such as healthcare or jobs or foreign policy. There won't be any more debate. There'll be dictatorship. We have to be very careful about this and really take action in terms of being active politically and voting in the right direction this time. Well, let's look at the economy. The US national debt hits a historic high over the last week or so, $34 trillion. Pretty high there, the highest ever before in our history, $34 trillion. But I think we should also look at what causes this debt. It's basically tax cuts on the wealthiest segments of our population, like the $1.7 trillion tax cut that Donald Trump engineered when he was in office in 2017. That actually blows up the deficit, but also spending, excessive and wasteful spending in certain areas add to the deficit. So it's tax cuts and wasteful spending. And there's been a lot of waste in the military-industrial complex where weapons are procured by the lobbyists for big companies, that are producing these weapons, and they get a cost-plus contract with the government. The government says, you know what, we're going to contract you to build this particular weapon system, but in the fine print, it's also signed on to, if the cost rises, the cost of production rises through cost of material, or if there's a delay in delivery of the weapons, we'll go along with that and we'll sign off on it. And this is when the defense contractors keep charging more and more money for things that are supposed to produce for less and produce on time. It's not just defense and military, but there's also waste in other areas too that have to be looked at carefully and brought under control. And we got to stop these massive tax cuts on the wealthiest segments of our society and big corporations. That also drives up deficit. And deficit is not good. That much deficit is not good for the country. Finally, the border crisis. House Speaker Mike Johnson led a delegation of 64 Republicans to the Mexican border, and this was all about putting pressure on Joe Biden. Yeah, and it was supposed to be so dramatic by getting these Republicans there to, with the news media covering it. And it's supposed to put pressure on Biden to be able to do something about the border, where many people are coming in now and seeking asylum, but thousands of them are coming in. We have to determine who are legitimately qualified for asylum and who are not, because the U.S. has signed on to the asylum agreement, asylum law, the international law, and American law is part of that, that we have to grant hearings for asylum when people are seeking it, political asylum. But to do that, you have to have more judges, immigration judges hired, and have them at the border, have them be able to interview people right away. And that has to be made streamlined. But instead, the Republican Congress is not spending the money for the kind of things that we need to secure the borders. Instead, they're just using that as a bargaining chip in foreign policy and saying they won't fund some of our foreign policy needs unless we fix that. And they're not really providing the money to fix that border problem by providing more judges, more border patrol agents, et cetera. And also looking at what's causing these people to leave some of these countries and come over here. We have to help with some of the economic development in those countries to keep them be able to work in those countries and to not let things destabilize them and to be wanting to come here so much.
Absolutely. Peter, good to chat. We'll do it many times through the course of a busy 2024.
I look forward to it, Tim. Thanks.